Hi guys, welcome back to another podcast episode. My name is Lily and I'm your host for Lily's Little Life Corner. Today we are going to be talking about code switching and how it kind of relates to my last topic, which was about censoring yourself, and how code switching is a negative form of censoring yourself. If you guys remember my last episode, I said censoring yourself can be good under certain circumstances, but this will be more discussion about when censoring yourself cannot be good for your own mental health or just for the betterment of society, if that makes sense. So yeah, that is what we will be talking about, and we will also touch on how code switching can affect people's mental health. Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoy this podcast episode. As always, you can listen to this podcast episode on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or you can watch it on my YouTube channel. And as always, I am not a psychologist, I'm just a psychology enthusiast, and this is going to be a bit of an armchair psychology take. And also a disclaimer, I have not experienced or needed to code switch as much as other people of color. So a lot of the things that I have researched have come from articles, and I did get to talk to some people about code switching and how they felt, and I actually got to interview one of them on this podcast episode. So yeah, a lot of the things will be coming from kind of outside opinions, just because I don't feel as qualified, if that makes sense, to talk about code switching. It has happened to me, definitely, which I will talk about later on in the episode, but I still felt it necessary to bring someone else on that has experienced it a little bit more. Let's get started. So let's start with defining kind of what code switching is and what it entails. So I pulled from two different articles for this episode. One article comes from Psychology Today, which was written by Kyan O'Connor, or Dr. Kyan O'Connor, and her article is titled "What is Code Switching?" And of course, as always, I will leave these links in the description. The second article that I pulled from was from Cleveland Clinic, and there is no author here, but they did interview Kaya Ray Prewitt, or Dr. Kaya Ray Prewitt, to kind of talk about code switching. So those are the articles that I pulled from today, and those are the articles that I will be referencing, and also the doctors that I will be referencing. So according to Dr. Prewitt, she defines code switching as changing your style, dress, or maybe even language and behavior in order to match what you think would be appropriate or would make someone else feel comfortable. Whereas Dr. Kyan O'Connor says the definition of code switching has not been static and has changed over time, and she kind of talks about like different social expectations and how code switching can change depending on the culture that you find yourself in. She goes on to say that her article is specifically focused on cultural code switching that involves the suppression of multiple aspects of one's cultural identity. Whereas Dr. Prewitt, I find, talks more about, in broad terms, what code switching is. So I found that Dr. Prewitt tended to argue that code switching is a little bit more normal among pretty much everyone. It's basically just feeling the need to fit in, is basically how she describes it. Whereas Dr. O'Connor argues, and I'm quoting, when people feel forced to code switch in order to prosper, it can have negative consequences. So both of these articles do go in different directions, and I think that's important to know as I'm talking about these things, and referencing their articles most importantly. So one of the examples that Dr. Prewitt provides is that educators and business people have to adapt their speaking patterns when connecting to people. The article, I think it was the article writer and not Dr. Prewitt herself, but the article quotes, "Code switching makes it possible to reach and connect with more people, opens up opportunities that you might otherwise be closed to, and enriches your understanding of the world." And they do mention kind of throughout their article that code switching does have its negative effects, so they're not necessarily like defending why code switching happens, but it's a less nuanced article, I find, which again is important to note But like I said, both articles kind of focus on different things. The Psychology Today article is more focused on the BIPOC community and kind of their need to code switch for survival, if that makes sense. So both do have very good examples of code switching, and they do go in depth on what code switching is, but just be aware of that as you guys are reading the articles, that they both have different viewpoints and they both talk of different aspects of code switching. So like I was saying, these differences in these articles can be seen in the different kind of examples that both articles provide. So whereas the Cleveland Clinic article points to teachers needing to change their vocabulary when they're speaking to a room full of adults versus speaking to a room full of children, Dr. O'Connor in the Psychology Today article points to this need of the BIPOC community and for code switching and how it's used as a means of survival. And I want to quote her directly where she says, for example, when a person considers each morning before getting dressed for work or school whether their traditional cultural garments will be viewed as acceptable, whether wearing a turban, hijab, or bindi will be off-putting to their colleagues or supervisors, or whether their natural hair, e.g. afro, dreadlocks, braids, etc. will be seen as unprofessional. So both articles definitely bring two different perspectives to the table, and I think both are worth reading. It's just some things that you need to keep in mind as you're going through, and I will kind of talk about more of that a little bit later. But anyway, one of the things that I found interesting that Dr. Prewitt mentions in the Cleveland Clinic article is that just about anyone can code switch, or just about anyone can face or feel the need to code switch. And she goes on to say that your ability status, i.e. like whether you're disabled or an able-bodied person, can also be a reason why you may need to code switch. But I think that's a bit of like a wrong thing to say. I'm not saying it's like politically incorrect. I'm just saying there's definitely different terminologies for that kind of quote unquote code switching among different categories of groups of people, and different categories of people have come up with their own terminologies. For example, I am autistic, and there's times where I have felt the need to change my behavior, change the way that I talk, change the way that I present myself in order to fit in or make others feel comfortable, right? And that, according to the Cleveland Clinic article, qualifies as code switching. However, the neurodivergent community has a different terminology for this. They use the word masking. You mask your autistic tendencies, you mask your ADHD, you mask, etc. You get what I'm saying. And I think it's important to recognize the meaning behind these words that these very specific communities have come up with to refer to their struggles or part of their struggles. I think it's very important. And like I said in my last episode, words have meaning, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's talk to my friend Jamal, who is both autistic and Black, and he's going to talk to you guys a little bit more about his code switching experience and how he feels code switching and masking differ or are similar. And so yeah, let's move over to that interview right now. Hey guys, so just to let you know, my part of the audio for this interview was not recorded, so I'm going to be asking the questions that I asked him in the interview, but I'm going to be doing it voice over so that you guys know what questions he's answering, and that way nobody is confused.
Hi, my name is Jamal. Digital creative on the internet. I'm freelancer slash contractor, doing a lot of odds and ends type of jobs, and here to answer some questions about code switching. This is something I've actually had to think about and unpack a lot recently, so kind of timely.
What would you define code switching as?
I'll tell you this one time that we were in Walmart, I think, and I ran into one of my old friends from elementary school, Black dude. And I was with my white friend that, we're like best friends from high school. And when I approached my, you know, long, I was gonna say long lost, but the Black guy that I haven't seen in a while, I kind of, I dapped him up, I changed, yo, what's good, homie, and all this stuff. And I just did what I do when I'm with my people, essentially. just what you do with black people. And it was a real quick interaction. And then as we separated and I'm still with my white friend, he's like, "What the hell was that? I've never seen you like that before." And I'm like, well, that's just how we roll. So in a way, I mean, yeah, in a way, it's almost like, no, yeah, no, it's not even in a way. It's just for someone like me that speaks, at least in my day to day, what is considered like very proper and very, some would even, I know some would say like white with a hard H, but they would say that, and so I have to, over time, have to, code switch to be in places safely. And sometimes that even means my own community, uh, or my own people. Something that I have to do, uh, not necessarily have to do, but I definitely fell into it with an old friend. If I have to go to like a barber shop or just any place where there's a lot of black people, I almost instinctively slip into it, um because yeah, it's about being safe. Like, I think that's kind of the basis of code switching.
Why do you slash why have you code switched?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, just to be safe in places where you have to adhere to certain norms, I mean, so I just described a situation, code switching with black people. I have to do a similar type of code switching when I'm around a large group of white people, even though my speech, I guess, has this what you would call white accent or kind of proper. It's like I still have to tune it a little bit to fit the audience, just to not make them uncomfortable. Not to make them uncomfortable, and yeah, for my own safety. I guess, yeah. I mean, probably the most extreme would be talking to a police officer, because that is like, unfortunately, a life or death thing. So even if this cadence that I have right now would not be what I would use for police officer. It would be a lot more direct, a lot more formal, a lot concise. It's just, and that's all about maintaining safety, treating the officer with the level of respect that they expect, and making sure I'm not making any subtle movements or you know not doing anything visibly illegal. Although I don't really do things illegal when I'm around police officers, but it's like I have to like keep better track of those things when uh when around those types of people. Yeah, that might have been just a really long way to say, I have to code switch. Yeah, to be safe and to blend in with specific crowds for specific purposes. I don't have to switch into it when I'm with family, but in specific cases where I'm around a lot of black people. It's just something I like, just instinctively, or at least black people that I don't know. Yeah, yeah, that's probably more um, accurate.
How has code switching affected you?
At least for my for my particular speech patterns, I guess getting a job is not one of my primary concerns, because they, I guess having to adhere in a society that is essentially white supremacist and kind of values being prim and proper and stuff. This I guess accent or my speech pattern kind of works for that. It's affected me in ways that, especially from a young age, I had to learn how to fit in and change my personality, or yeah, code switch to fit the environment. It's led to me having to just be somebody that I'm not sometimes, which can be taxing. It makes me uncomfortable in certain environments if I have to do it for too long. And I'll say this because I've been working from home for the last year, almost 2 years, and not having to interact with people on a regular basis, which means that I don't have to code switch in my day to day. Now, when I go out in public in certain situations, I have to like remember to put that on, and that in itself is already disorienting. So, you know, it's in a way led to me avoiding being in like large groups of people because it adds to the anxiety of, yeah, like what kind of a code switch persona do I have to put on for a particular group of people? What if I don't know that group of people? Or what if I know some people, I don't know others? Am I going to run into the same situation where my friends like, I don't know that guy? What, who, like, who did you turn into? And have to accommodate for that. Yeah. So it affects it. Yeah. It affects me a lot day to day, or when I'm out with people. Yeah.
Would you say there are pros to code switching?
Safety. Self-preservation. Or like I was saying, just living in a capitalist white supremacist environment and maintaining that self-preservation, it's good for that.
You're also autistic. Would you say code switching is something that applies to autism?
I think the longer way, because I don't know if I can articulate it very well. What I think of in my head for code switching is like very short term. Being in particular environments and being able to survive that in small bursts versus in regards to like ADHD or autism, like a long term code switch is masking, like a really long term like switch if you have to go into that mode every time you go to work, if you have to go into that mode every time you're interacting with anybody, if you have to do that with your friends, your family, that's closer to masking. But at least in my mind, but it also has, it's for the same purpose of self-preservation, because ultimately people mask to appear normal, to appear neurotypical, and to not upset the balance and make other people uncomfortable. Is like that's, I feel, the primary focus of that long-term masking, which in the short term for code switching, it has the same purpose, but I wouldn't consider code switching, short-term code switching, in the same way that I would view a autistic or ADHD mask. Yeah. Masking is a very long-term code switch where you're doing the same types of self-preservation tactics over a long period of time, and even when it's really bad, especially, I mean, I don't know. So I didn't get like a official autism diagnosis. I'm self-diagnosed, but there was a very long time where I didn't even know the concept of masking or what ADHD or autism was. And then as I started to really look into it and unpack it, then it's like starting to understand that not only was I putting on a mask for people that have to interact with on a day-to-day basis, I was doing it privately in my own space, where it's like I feeling like I have to appear normal even when I'm like by myself. And like that's, masking can be a little bit more intense, and as was alluded to in the Psychology Today article, is probably more harmful and like literally dangerous, or like over time not being able to unmask your true self, or just to be comfortable in your own skin, over time has really long-term negative effects, whether that's mentally having to flip-flop from different masks, or try to adhere to what other people consider normal, or like, I mean, the extreme version of like the mental exhaustion is just the like long-term burnout, which has physical consequences. So, uh, you know, I read that the autistic burnout has like does actual brain damage, and it's like not something that you can easily recover from. In fact, yeah. I mean, I might even still be in a burnout and like the autistic burnout like now, but it's something that takes a really long time to come out of. And I feel like one of the best solutions is to just stop masking, like be yourself, being able to like really be yourself and to live your most free and true life is kind of the path to recovery. So, yeah, that's probably a really long answer, but yeah, yeah, I think that covers it. Yeah, it's literally impossible, unsustainable. And yeah, definitely how some people just get stuck in that almost permanently. And that, like, that it's such a hard place to be, because when you're in that mode, it's like I mean, yeah, it's survival mode. You're basically doing what you have to do to get by, and then you kind of get home or stop working and collapse because you don't have any energy for anything else. Yeah, the just being able to like fully unmask is something that you have to really unpack, even when you feel that you're in a safe space, like you said, like with your autistic like friends or neurodivergent friends, like even like they probably know the whole deal with masking, and you know um and yet you still feel like you still have to do it, would mean that there's some element where you just you don't feel safe. Even with somebody that I think we both know pretty well, but she's a really long term friend of mine, and I feel like I'm unmasked around her a lot, but then there are certain topics or certain things that are just not safe topics. So it's like I kind of have to hold it in. Like I even have to mask with her being one of my closest friends. And over time, it's starting to take a toll. Yeah, with code switching, it really seems like something that's temporary, or just yeah, trying to fall in line with some stereotypes, at least, for people of color. Uh, some, like code switching can be for me, like going to the restaurant and knowing that I have to tip well, because that is the bias that black people don't tip. So I have to make sure that I tip well, to not fall in line with the stereotype, to get better service, because sometimes they think that you're not going to tip well, so you have to really put on a extra nice face to interact with the waiter, or the waiter, waitress, or staff. And then like it even goes with the actual transaction. So, but like I said, that's still a very short term thing, you know. Yeah, yeah.
What's the difference between code switching and masking in your opinion?
They have the same purpose, or similar purpose, of just self-preservation. In your case, being at a restaurant around a lot of people that actively disagree with you, and sometimes even with your entire existence, it's not really a safe space to come out and be like, actually, oh, I'm Mexican, I wanna, like that would either, yeah, it will cause a scene, it could especially now, I mean, you were saying 2016, it's probably gotten worse, of how unfortunately, is like, for lack of a better term, how masked off some people have gotten with not even trying to hide their racism and bigotry, and in some cases, just like actually getting violent. So it's just something that, at least that kind of code switching is something that you have to do. And even when you said you had those situations, um, that bottled up like part of you still had to come out when you talked with your friends later. Whereas masking, when it's like really deeply ingrained, that part doesn't come out, and you kind of keep bottling all that up, and then yeah, it ends with a burnout, basically. Yeah. Like, yeah, but it's definitely kind of the same, for the same purpose of self-preservation, but masking is a little bit more extreme and constant. But unmasking, yeah, something that I've had to deal with, because even when I thought that I was unmasking, it really meant that I was like masking less. And then like very recently, it's like having a more full reckoning of like starting to completely unmask and being, you know, my true self, when being in like, I had a friend group, or have a friend group, where I thought that I had to pretend to be kind of a dude bro type of guy, for, to keep my friends, and two, to not appear weird. But then once I like kind of came to terms with my own disabilities, and starting to understand about who me is, what it is to be myself, just kind of take the mask off with those people, and they don't even, at least the people that I think love and care about you, they kind of don't even blink. And they're just like, oh, yeah, this is you, or like, oh, like, you're being a little weird, but yeah, that's kind of one of your quirks. At least that was my experience. There's definitely experiences where the mask comes off, and then I start to get more side-eyed with some people. And then it's like, you got to put the mask back on. I'm like, oh. But ultimately, the goal is to unmask completely at all times, and even in spaces where you think that maybe it's not particularly safe, just standing on your principles and morals, and just making sure that your authentic self is heard, is seen, and making sure that that is in view in all aspects of life, and not just bits and pieces, because in bits and pieces you're still masking. But yeah, I mean, yeah, the but the code switching thing, remains. Like, that's still like, in some environments, it still might need to occur. Yeah, it still might need to occur, but I guess the goal would be to not have to do it. But that is not the reality of our situations. Like, I live. I mean, I guess it's not as red as where you're at, but Texas is a very deep state. Like, it is a very deep red state outside the cities. So I have to do what I have to do to stay alive in those types of environments. But if I'm with a group of people that I consider safe, or even if um even if they're people that I don't know that well, um and the I guess the environment is appropriate, I'm still unpacking this a little bit. But it's like, yeah, the goal is to be as unmasked as possible.
Is there any other thought that has occurred to you as we had talked and that you would like to share?
I think, like, I just had this thought, actually. When or at least when I posited that code switching is a self preservation tactic, and, I think it is, while also coming to terms with our own unmasking, and, or having masked in, long term situations. Now, the code switch, being in certain environments, the code switch is now changing to reflect unmasking. So it's like, I think I would code switch in different ways if I was in particular environments now. Now that I have like understood my or coming to terms with my own like masking, and in the in the pursuit of unmasking, which ultimately means just like being your true self and not being ashamed of who you are, and just embracing it. So then code switching in like an environment where, in a black environment where before I would just be fully, dabbing them up, and once it would probably be just less of that. And like maybe that would like be the starts, or like dapping them up while I go off about how much I love One Piece or something. It's like I'm not being afraid to embrace the nerdy side of me, while also just understanding that the dapping up, and that kind of like language, like that's part of the culture. That's part of the culture. That's part of like that kind of code switch. So it's like the code switch can be adapted in a healthier way that masking cannot. It's like adapting the mask is still masking, and it's not healthy. So yeah, that's probably the last thing that I could say about that. Code switching, good, or at least more positive, and masking totally bad. There's not really a good way to mask, a good or a healthy way to mask.
Where can people find you?
So, I mean, Twitter is a shithole, so don't go there. But I'm now on Blue Sky, so you can follow me on Blue Sky at jamjohn.bsky.social. And I mean, to be on the topic of masking and code switching, because Blue Sky is such a just free place where I there are no expectations of me or who I should be. I feel like I am the most free to be myself. So if you want to see some like real, just cringe might not be the word, but maybe it is. It's like, if you just want to see me be authentically me, check me out on Blue Sky. Yeah, definitely have been in those environments a lot. So it really did dovetail nicely into my own recent unmasking journey. So it's definitely fun to talk about. Thanks for having me. You're welcome, Lily. It's been a pleasure.
Again, thank you to Jamal for coming on to this interview. If you guys would like to follow him, I will leave all of his social media linked down below. Again, sorry for this weird, like, needing to insert my questions post production. I didn't realize that I wasn't recording my own sound when I was recording the interview, so I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry if it's a little bit different. We did have a longer conversation that I'm so sad that you guys couldn't hear, but regardless, his answers are still magnificent. And yeah, anyway, let's move on to the rest of the video. So like I said, for me personally, masking is something that I kind of did without thinking. It was a very permanent thing that I did in my life and in my interactions with everyone. A lot of people like to say that people with autism don't really understand social cues, but in my experience, autistic people are more aware of social cues than just about anyone, and especially a lot of autistic women who either still haven't been diagnosed or were diagnosed late in life. The societal expectations are definitely very different. And as someone who is an autistic woman, I found myself studying people a lot and studying kind of what behavior was quote unquote normal, and I would very much so pay attention to like what the reaction was after I said something. And I find that that's the reason why a lot of people go undiagnosed, especially again women, because we're constantly adapting and we're constantly masking to fit in with our environment to the point that it becomes unnoticeable, to the point where when I realized I had autism, I thought, oh well, I'm just a high functioning autistic person, which I understand high functioning is problematic phrasing, but that's the way that a lot of people recognize that. Better phrasing would be low needs autistic. I'm pretty sure. If it's not, please do correct me if I'm wrong. But my point is that because I was able to adapt and mask very, very well, a lot of people still look at me and they're like, but you're not autistic, but they don't realize that I'm just very much so masking. And I find that masking, especially for me, it's often done when I'm not thinking about it. It's just automatic. I don't think, oh, I need to act this certain way or else people will not perceive me as normal, or oh, I need to act this other certain way in order for people to be nice to me or for people to want to hang out with me or whatever the case may be. My masking is definitely so permanently ingrained into me to the point where even when I'm hanging out with other autistic people, I mask without even thinking about it. I know the other autistic people will know, you know, normal autistic behavior, but I still, even though I feel comfortable around those friends, even though I trust those friends, I still feel the need to mask. And I still feel the need to, hide who I truly am. And it's because I've masked for so long that I don't truly know who I am anymore. And thankfully, I've started to unpack this behavior and I've started to really come to terms with who I am as a person. But it can still be really, really hard to get rid of those feelings of I need to conceal who I truly am. And so that to me is the difference between masking versus code switching. Not only is the terminology different, but the kind of effects of both things are different. And the two different communities, the BIPOC community versus the disabled community, have set definitions for those two words. So for example, with me and my code switching, I have often found that my behavior is a lot more flexible when I need to code switch, if that makes sense. For example, if I'm with my family and then I run into a friend, I'm able to kind of switch from family member to friendly. Does that make sense? Like my interactions, my language patterns, tone of voice, they change easier than when I'm attempting to stop masking or when I'm attempting to start masking. I don't know if that makes sense. And I don't know if I'm wording it correctly. I'm sure once I'm editing the video, I'll think of better phrasing, but right now I am really struggling with my brain. My brain is just not working today. I think I got the flu over the weekend, so that's not good. But anyway, for me, code switching is more temporary than anything. Masking is where I really find that it's more long term. And so I find that using the word code switching to describe masking is not the way to go. I'm gonna say because again, like I said in my previous episode, words do have meaning and they do have impact, and their meanings are important, right? And when a community comes up with a term to describe the struggles of that entire community, for example, with BIPOC, it's code switching, or with the disabled community, it's masking. For you to kind of use those terms interchangeably, to me, comes off as a little bit, I don't want to say uneducated, but yeah, it does kind of come off as a little bit uneducated, just because though code switching and masking to me have similarities, they also have differences. And I think those differences are very important in understanding the communities that you are talking about, especially when those communities overlap. Like, for example, with my friend Jamal, or with me. I am both BIPOC and a disabled person, and when those things overlap, I think it's very important to keep those words separate. I think though you can say that code switching applies to everyone to some extent, I think you should also keep in mind that different communities have different terminologies for the way that they change their behavior or the way that they interact with people in their community. I hope that makes sense. But I don't know, if you guys disagree with that, please do let me know, and let's have a conversation about this. Do you agree that masking is similar to code switching? Do you agree that masking and code switching have some similarities, have some overlap, but shouldn't be used interchangeably? What do you guys think? So anyway, let's move on to the reason why people code switch. The Cleveland Clinical article says some code switching is intentional, like when we choose clothing or accessories to wear to an event that will help us fit in. In other cases, it's automatic. For example, you may slip into a different language, accent, or cadence when speaking to certain people without even realizing it. Whether or not we intend to do it, Dr. Poet notes that there are a lot of reasons people code switch. Sometimes, she explains, we code switch to counteract stereotypes about or live up to expectations for groups we belong to. Other times we're responding to an institutional culture or expectation. We may even code switch because it makes us feel safe. Dr. O'Connor says something similar about kind of the necessity for combating or living up to negative standards. She says, according to Harvard Business Review, code switching most often occurs in environments where negative stereotypes about BIPOC individuals don't align with what is considered normative or appropriate for that environment. This is most commonly in academia and in places of employment. She goes on to quote a study from the Pew Research Center, which says, in a study conducted by the Pew Research Center, they found that overall 4 in 10 Black and Hispanic adults often feel the need to change the way they talk around others or different races and ethnicities, especially among non-Hispanic whites. Both articles also talk about the Crown Act and how Black women have to worry about their natural hair, and they often have to worry about changing their natural hair or changing their hairstyle in order to fit in with employer expectations or employer dress code. And this is due to existing racist biases of employers that are still present to this day. And though the Crown Act was made to raise awareness of the mistreatment that Black women receive because of their natural hair, Black women and girls unfortunately aren't the only victims of workplace or school harassment due to hairstyles. Often Indigenous boys will be victims of this kind of harassment as well. Often Indigenous people grow out their hair due to religious or spiritual reasons, but still to this day you will get headlines that read, Oklahoma mother outraged after child's haircut at school. The article goes on to read, Rachel Plumbing's 7-year-old son is Native American and wears long hair with pride. She said she was in tears after he returned home from Frontier Public Schools last week with hair missing. And this was posted August 27th of 2024, so just a few months ago. As a result of this, many Black and Indigenous people feel the need to alter or change or cut their hair in order to prevent harassment like this from happening to them. The Cleveland Clinic article quotes, those past experiences have made code switching a common practice for Black women in interview settings. The Crown study found that approximately 2/3 of Black women change their hair for a job interview, and that they are 54% more likely to feel that they have to wear their hair straight for an interview to go well. Dr. Poet then adds with a quote, since there has been bias within these different systems in the past, people feel like they have to adjust how they typically would present themselves in order to have an opportunity, get accepted, or be taken seriously. And the author goes on to say, in other words, code switching isn't always a reflection of your environment, but it usually does reflect past experiences and patterns of injustice faced by a group or a person. And yeah, often people code switch when they feel like someone will call them out on being their true selves. They prefer to prevent that kind of argument or that kind of calling out or on the spot questioning, so they code switch in order to prevent those kind of uncomfortable conversations from happening. But they also code switch, like both articles say, in order to secure financial stability, which is unfortunately a big part of why code switching happens. Dr. O'Connor quotes in her article and says, many have argued code switching is one of the key dilemmas that BIPOC employees face. I'm sure we can all agree that the workplace setting requires some degree of code switching from everyone, including non-BIPOC employees. All of us likely have had to switch some aspects of our personalities, tone of voice, and clothing choices between the home and the office, depending on the workplace culture and expectations. Some might even say this phenomenon is really about being professional and has nothing to do with race. But let's ponder this for a moment. Who decides what is professional professional and what is unprofessional? Who decides whether an afro or dreadlocks are unacceptable for certain environments? Where do we get messages that cultural or traditional clothing is improper and potentially offensive? So yeah, code switching does tend to happen a lot in the workplace, and that's where I also had to code switch a lot. Again, I do want to reiterate that I have been masking more than I have needed to code switch. Code switching is thankfully not a big part of what I need to do on a day-to-day basis. Mostly just because I don't really interact with people on a day-to-day basis. But when I have had jobs where I am facing customers, not only have I needed to ramp up my masking, but I also have needed to code switch in certain instances. And I have felt the need to suppress my Mexican identity. And this has only been emphasized because I live in a red state and because the city that I live in is majority white. There are a few people of color on my street and the city that I live in, but the majority of the people that I interact with are white. Throughout my employment history, I have worked in places where people know that I can't argue back, and they will take advantage of that by saying really racist things. And if you look at me and really take a good look at me, you can tell that I'm not white. You can tell that I'm a person of color. And people have often come up to me and said something racist just to see how I would react. But because I'm in the workplace and because not only am I expected to be professional, but also I live in a red state where people carry guns, I have had to stay quiet. I have had to suppress my identity. In some instances, I have even had to pretend like I wasn't as connected with my cultural heritage as I was. And this was all for my safety. Not just for my financial safety, i.e., not just because I didn't want to get fired, but because I genuinely feared these people and how these people would react if they found out that I actually speak fluently in Spanish, and what they would do if they find out that I'm actually very connected to my Mexican roots. I've had to pretend like I agree with these racist rants that these people are going on. I've had to pretend like I don't care about immigrants. I've had to pretend that I actually hate immigrants. I've had to pretend that I'm just another racist American. And again, this wasn't just because I was scared of being fired, it was because I was scared of how these people, often white men in their 40s, would react if they found out that I did not agree with what they were saying. And though in other topics I would wrap up by saying something along the lines of put your mental health first and stop trying to accommodate others by changing yourself, I just don't think that is appropriate for this kind of topic. I think that would be very tone deaf of me if I told you just stop code switching, act like yourself, be your true authentic self. I do think it would be very, very tone deaf of me to give that advice. Unlike what the Cleveland Clinic article suggests, a vast majority of code switching doesn't just happen to fit in. It's not as simple as that. I also don't think code switching should be seen as disingenuous, or that any person engaging in code switching should be seen as a pretender like the Cleveland Clinic author suggests. I think code switching is truly a form of survival and self-sacrifice and self-protection. Often, people of color have to make the very difficult decision of should I protect my mental health and be my true authentic self, or should I protect my mental health and code switch so that nobody harasses me for not code switching? And I think that is a very important thing to remember and a very important thing to keep in mind whenever you're talking about code switching and whenever you're talking about the negative effects that code switching has on people's mental health. It's like Dr. O'Connor quotes in her article. She says, "Unfortunately, we live in a time where you are faced with a dilemma. Should you suppress your cultural identity for the sake of success, or risk sacrificing advancement for the sake of being your authentic self in all environments?" So after me saying all this, you're probably wondering, well, what can we do to help? What can we do to help minimize the negative effects that code switching has on mental health? And to that, I say humans will always try to find a way to fit in. Slightly changing your behavior from time to time isn't a bad thing if you really are trying to connect with people, or if you really are trying to center yourself in environments where being yourself truly and fully would not be super appropriate. For example, being in church. If you are somebody who swears a lot and that is being your true authentic self, it might not be appropriate for you to swear while you're in church. That kind of changing to fit in is normal, and humans have done so for the longest time and will probably continue to do so for the longest time. However, code switching definitely, like I said, is a form of survival. Not just financial survival, but mental survival, mental health survival, and physical survival at times too. Unfortunately, for a lot of BIPOC, you never really know when being your true authentic self will get you killed. We live in a society where police officers are all too happy to shoot anyone they deem a threat. And unfortunately, a lot of people of color have characteristics that police officers feel are a threat. And that's another issue in and of itself. But that's why I'm saying telling people to stop code switching is just a little bit tone deaf. You can't stop code switching when not code switching puts your life in danger. And even me, someone who is light skinned, I've felt in danger and I felt like I had to code switch in order to survive. And again, I'm not saying survive in like financial health. I'm saying survive, like actually survive, because I was scared somebody would hurt me if I fought back against their opinions, or if I didn't pretend like I agreed with all of their racist opinions. And that only gets worse for Indigenous people and Black people. Whenever they're faced with a police officer or a situation where they have to talk to a police officer, they have to code switch in order to put themselves in a safer position than they would be otherwise. A lot of the reason code switching happens is due to the ingrained racist biases that the society that we live in currently has. And it'll take a long time for us to completely get rid of those racist biases, especially with the way that society is right now. It really does seem like a really long road ahead of us to get rid of those racist biases. It's not easy to get rid of a racist ideology, especially when it's so present in the society that we live in. I mean, pretty much anywhere you look, you're getting fed racist propaganda. Even if you watch the news every once in a while, you're getting fed racist propaganda. So it will take a long time for us to completely get rid of code switching or the need to code switch for survival. But in the meantime, we can definitely raise awareness and talk about these situations where people have felt the need to code switch because otherwise they wouldn't be in a good position. And we should talk to more people of different walks of life in our day-to-day life to truly understand the magnitude that code switching has and the reasons why code switching happens. Taking the time to understand this will really help us come together closer as a community, and it will help us connect over something. Both the Psychology Today article and the Cleveland Clinical article point to code switching having negative tolls on people's mental health. And if we can come together as a community and be more open about these conversations surrounding code switching, we can also help the people who need to code switch for survival, help them feel not so lonely, help them feel like they're not pretending. And it'll definitely help get rid of this idea that code switching makes you a pretender or makes you untrustworthy. Let me actually read to you guys the quote that the Cleveland Clinic article said exactly, which is something that I just found very tone deaf, truly. It says, for all its benefits, code switching isn't always a positive thing. Dr. Probert has also seen code switching lead to intense feelings of disconnection and isolation. And it's not just about how we feel, though that's important too. Sometimes our efforts to make other people accept us have the opposite effect. Dr. Probert offers the example of a team of coworkers. If members of your peer group at work notice that you behave differently with them than you do with the people outside the office, she says, you could be perceived as disingenuous or untrustworthy. I think talking to members of the BIPOC community and talking to them about how code switching affects them will definitely help dispel this idea that people who code switch are disingenuous and untrustworthy. That is simply ridiculous. However, I do agree that code switching does take a very heavy toll on your mental health, especially if you're having to do it every single day for 8 hours a day, like some people have to do in their job. Anyway, I want to end this podcast episode off with Dr. O'Connor's strategies for reducing the need for code switching. She says there are strategies organizations can take to begin reducing the need for code switching and the negative consequences BIPOC employees face as a result. 1. Organizational assessment. Organizations should evaluate how their culture and environment may create pressure for BIPOC employees to code switch. This can be done by engaging in critical conversation with staff and employees about these topics and should result in the generation of strategies to address shortcomings. Number 2, diversity and inclusion. Working in non-diverse environments often intensifies the need to code switch. Diversification at all levels to ensure representation of various races, ethnicities, and cultures, as well as other social identities, is critical. However, we must remember that diversity does not equal inclusion. Inclusive environments where everyone is not only invited to the table, but also has a voice at the table and is rewarded for using that voice are necessary. Number 3, leaders can set the standard. When a BIPOC employee reaches a certain level, they have more power and less fear of retaliation. When leaders in an organization bring more of their cultural identity to an organization, employees often feel supported in doing the same. President Barack Obama is a great example of how powerful leaders who bring their cultural identities into even the most formal of environments can change the outlook for everyone looking up to them. Number 4, for BIPOC employees, be strategic. Unfortunately, we live in a time where you are faced with a dilemma. Should you suppress your cultural identity for the sake of success, or risk sacrificing advancement for the sake of your authentic self in all environments? This dilemma not only poses career and psychological risks for individuals, it also costs organizations, which may miss out on the diverse perspectives and contributions and synergies brought to the table from BIPOC employees who are uncomfortable being their authentic selves. My advice is to be strategic. Understand the culture of the organizations you move within. Think about your values and make decisions that align with them. Don't feel guilty about code switching. It is not your responsibility to bear the burden of facing a dilemma that you have not created. Protect your mental health at all costs. If you find yourself in a situation so taxing that it is impacting your mental and emotional well-being, it might not be worth the sacrifice. But at the end of the day, this is a decision each individual must make for themselves until the day we are no longer faced with this dilemma. Anyway, that is all that I have for this episode. Let me know what you guys think, and let me know if you guys have experienced any instance of code switching and how that has affected you. Let's start a conversation about this. Like I said, we definitely do need to start more conversations, and we need to not only start conversations, but continue the conversations and get to a place where we no longer feel the need to code switch for survival. Like I said, changing yourself to fit in is normal, but there does come a point where changing yourself to fit in always is not normal. We should be making more effort to be inclusive, not just in the way that we talk about things, but the people that we talk to. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and yeah, please remember that I have all of my social media linked down below, as well as both articles that I read from today, 2 other helpful articles, and Jamal's social media accounts. If you want to follow him on any social media, you can do so. I will have all of that linked down below. Anyway, I will see you guys in my next podcast episode, which will be next week. So, in 7 days. I know these last 2 podcast episodes were uploaded with a week longer in between them, but I will get back to my regular schedule with the next podcast episode. And the next podcast episode will be about dating apps, which will be fun. I did talk about this in my live stream on my YouTube channel, but I did want to make that podcast episode a little bit different, and I wanted to have a little bit of a different formula just to kind of play around with my format. So yeah, definitely look forward to that. But yeah, thank you for watching or listening if you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.